Hi, my name is Joshua Taffin, and today I'm going to go over my Chapter 5 takeaway of Chapter 5's content of popular radio and origins of broadcasting. This chapter was a fascinating chapter for me because I didn't know anything going into learning about radio and broadcasting history and science of it, but it was interesting to learn the evolution and the changes of the radio and origins of broadcasting. So let's begin. So, Chapter 5 goes through the inventions of radio and the origins of broadcasting. So, basically, it's kind of funny reading this because for a long time they thought one person invented this radio and then it changed after that person died, and the person that actually invented it was not credited, and there was a lot of pettiness and a lot of suing and patents and legal issues going on during this time. You also have the evolution of radio, where it started from just government used or just contacting, not really using it for entertainment, and then changing that from entertainment to streaming now. Contemporary radio and the business and economics of radio, which is very fascinating because radio, when we get into this, is a monopoly and one will rise, and we see the downfall of some companies, some radio stations, and the rise of others. And then radio broadcasting today. So podcasting, streaming services, anything like that. It goes over how radio is still popular, but yet streaming kind of killed the radio star almost, where streaming's becoming more and more popular over time. So the early development of the radio. So it happened in the mid 1800s, the invention of the telegraph. So basically Alexander Graham Bell and others helped create the telegraph, which was a wired communication where no one can speak. They only did Morse code, so the dots and dashes. And that's how they communicated. They had no telephones. They had nothing of the sort. So they had to use Morse code to communicate. And then you started going into wireless transmissions, like electromagnetic waves, which are invisible electronic impulses similar to visible light. We can see light, but we can't see the waves of light because, of course, on the spectrum of the wavelengths, electromagnetic waves are a higher frequency. Same thing with radio waves. Radio waves can be harnessed so that signals can be sent from a transmission point to a reception point. So basically, the sender will send something in wireless, like telephones, and a transmission point will end up at the receiver's point as well. So in 1894, we have Marconi, who patented the wireless telegraphy, a form of voiceless point-to-point communication. And he created his own company, the American Marconi. So he patented the wireless telegraphy, and it helped start the radio, help start telephones, point-to-point communication, where they can use it without having wires. So in 1895, Alexander Popov sent and received wireless messages. So they sent wireless messages through radio waves, electromagnetic waves, and they can actually speak through this instead of sending Morse code. So people could understand it and didn't have to learn Morse code. Well, you have Nikola Tesla, which is a very underrated scientist and very underappreciated in his time and even now. He was overshadowed by Marconi's work. Well, in 1943, Marconi's wireless patent was deemed Tesla's the inventor of the radio. So basically, Marconi stole Tesla's ideas and patented them for himself, and then not even, I don't know how many years later that is, almost 50 years later, even after Nikola Tesla's death, Tesla never got the credit that he deserved. There was no credit where credit was due. So, after his death, like many artists, like Vincent van Gogh, they become popular. Well, after Nikola Tesla started to get recognition after his death, instead of during when he was alive. And then you have the inventors, development of sound recording. So it happened mainly in the 1900s. In 1902, Lee D. Forrest set up the first wireless telephone company. So he created his own wireless telephone company, which that kind of starts off the monopoly of this too, where who will be the last one standing, who will be the monopoly at the end. Improvements helped increase the listener's ability to hear dots and dashes and later speech and music. So at first, only same thing with the telegraph. They can only send Morse code, whatever, dots and dashes. And then it progressed and changed into speech and music. So people don't have to learn Morse code. And then you had Edwin Armstrong, which unfortunately was overshadowed again, like Nikola Tesla, who was a true inventor. And this is where it gets petty. They sued, they fought, they went to the Supreme Court. This is Edwin Armstrong right here. He had his work stolen by DeForest and didn't get the recognition until later in his life, even around his death. And so now you have the Wireless Ship Act of 1910. It required all major U.S. sea-going ships carrying more than 50 passengers and traveling 200 miles off have wireless telephones, so transmissions will be easier to send. In case of a disaster or in distress, they were easy to send and contact to get help. Ironically, that was not the case in 1912 with the Titanic. And you have the Radio Act of 1912, which attempted to address the problem of amateur radio operators increasingly cramming the airways. So the Titanic, a lot of people could have survived the Titanic if the ship that was supposed to help them out would have arrived on time, but they couldn't send the transmissions. The Titanic could not send signals to the ships asking for help because they were crammed, because so many people were on the airways. So the Radio Act of 1912 addressed it to where it only allowed so many people on the airways, and people still use to say have their own stations for airways. So, at my public school in my county, they have their own bus radio. So only the front desk of that school and then the bus drivers have that radio. So no one else is on that radio due to safety hazards, and no one's cramming that radio frequency and transmission either. So communication is clear and convenient. And then we had the development of sound recording. So the development, it started in 1917, which was the brink of World War I. And the Navy closed down all radio operations, took control of key radio transmitters to ensure military security. Because during this time, people could tap wires, even in World War II, and now people could tap wires. You have spies, where you have the Allies and Axis trying to get information from both sides. And so the Navy just took control over it. And you didn't want to have so many people on the radio waves either, or the radio, so that they're not crammed, and also important information is not being slipped out. And so 1919, you have the RCA, or the Radio Corporation of America, which was one of the first radio corporations in America, obviously. A company developed during World War I that was designed to pull radio patents. So basically, they were the overhead of the radio, basically the big monopoly, and they contracted out with GE, AT&T, United Fruit. So they had the patents for the radios, but they were under RCA, but businesses like GE, AT&T, and United Fruit can work and contracted out with them, so they get profit as well. And so now you have 1920, Frank Conrad realized the potential of the radio as a mass medium. So he started the station KDKA, regarded as the first commercial broadcast station. So basically, he helped create the first public broadcasting station that people can tune into. And so the U.S. Commerce Department licensed 5 radio stations, made their own radio, and companies like AT&T can have their own radio station and gain profit from that. Well, in 1922, AT&T decided to make and sell its radio receivers, which went against RCA's agreements. So they basically, in business sense, went breach of contract. They were not to do that because AT&T was getting 100% of the profits whereas RCA was getting none of the profits, and AT&T was contracted out of RCA. So also AT&T kind of flopped with this with radio ads. AT&T started selling commercial ad time to companies, and I would like to thank AT&T that I have to listen to a 30-second ad to get 30 minutes of uninterrupted listening on Spotify. Thank you, AT&T, so much for that. Total broadcasting, 10 minutes long. So how we complain about a 2-minute ad in the middle of our shows, well, they had 10 minutes. And I don't know how much you can talk in 10 minutes about your business, maybe a lot. But these companies that would buy airtime would have 10 minutes to talk about their business. I would have hated that. I would have not gotten a radio because of that. And so you have the rise of AT&T starting its own radio company, but in helping boost profits for corporations. But you also have the decline where they went breach a contract. And so you have RCAs. So you have the Red Networks, which is NBC, the original telephone group. So they were the original group, kind of like old money. They were first in line, the oldest, wealthiest kind of, sort of like that. And then now you have the Blue Networks established by RCA, GA, and Westinghouse. So they were the newer, more improved in a sense. And many independent stations began affiliating with NBC to receive programming. So NBC helped independent stations help create their own radio broadcasting, and they got profit from that too, but they also share profit with NBC. And then NBC was categorized as the best musical, dramatic, and comedic talent in one place. So they marketed themselves as all in one. You don't have to go to GA, Westinghouse, and RCA for that. You can just go straight to NBC for that. And then now in 1923, you had the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, charge RCA with violations of antitrust laws, but allowed RCA's monopoly to continue. So basically, RCA can continue contracting out radio stations to corporations like AT&T while still gaining a profit. So you also have CBS and NBC. In 1928, you have William Paley, bought a controlling interest in CBS to sponsor his business. Option Time paid affiliate stations $50 per hour for an option, a portion of their time for ads. So basically, William Paley, with his cigar company, he bought $50 worth of time for an hour where he could promote his business. And so it also sold spaces for ads and sponsorships, but also lured artists like Frank Sinatra, George Burns, Gracie Allen, Groucho, where they could pay $50 and that hour's theirs, and they can produce their own music, sing their songs to help get them noticed. And so you have Herbert Huber, who ordered radio stations to share time by setting aside central frequencies for entertainment and news. So during this time, radios were just used for the Navy or for communication with during war times or anything like that. Well, because of CBS promoting young artists like Frank Sinatra and George Burns, Herbert Huber decided that radio stations should have entertainment that lures people and the common class to listen to the radio and tune in. So you have the golden age of radio. So basically, when I think of the golden age of radio, I think of the Great Gatsby, the Roaring 20s and 30s. You have Communications Act of 1934, and then you have the golden age of the radio. Early radio programming, you have the Lone Ranger, the Shadow, the Green Hornet, and Little Orphan Annie. I think of Little Orphan Annie. I think of the scene in A Christmas Story where Ralphie is trying to break the code on his favorite Little Orphan Annie radio show, and it comes out to drink more Ovaltine. And so now you also have President Roosevelt's Fireside Chats, which during the Great Depression he would say what he wanted America to hear. He wanted it to be a peaceful time to reflect and how Even though they are suffering, they can come out of that. You have Amos and Andy, which is a radio show during that time, and it would play in lobbies, restrooms, and entryways, so it got people interested in listening to the radio. And then you also have The War of the Worlds, which is a reading, a dramatic reading, basically, on the radio, a science fiction story, where basically caused mass hysteria because people thought it was real, because it sounded real, because it had special effects, orchestra, everything like that, so it caused mass panic. And then you have the portable radios. So the radio invents itself. So radios during that time were at the house being plugged in. You have the invention of the TV, but the TV during this time was the upper class, upper middle class, upper class. So lower, middle, and then lower class just had radios because it was cheapest. And then you have transistors, which were small electrical devices that can receive and amplify radio signals. So basically, it was small devices that could be basically a radio. That's where you get transistor radios, where you can just carry it on your own, like a Walkman. You can just put it in your pocket, or kind of like a boombox. You can take it with you, and it can play the radio. You have also FM, or if you know, you know. And FM offers static-free reception and greater fidelity and clarity than AM radio. So AM was the classic radio signals, where it was staticky. You had to fix your antenna to get it non-static, but FM helped reinvent that and offered static-free reception. So in the mountains here, FM is big because the mountains help sometimes block radio signals. So when you're turning on the radio, when you hit a pothole, it's like so a lot on AM. So a lot of people tune into FM in the mountains. And then you have the top 40 hits. And so you have format radio, which experimented with formula-driven radio. You also have rotation, which played the top songs many times during the day. So they would listen to, I know we would listen to either, Lord forbid, Flowers or Antihero 10 times a day. That's why I don't have radio, so I can listen to my own music. And it would play those popular songs all the time. And then you have the top 40 format, which most popular songs hits in a given week measured by record sales. So why, let's say, Miley Cyrus or Taylor Swift are pushing their songs on the radio? Because they get money from that by record sales. Streaming, when we look back, they don't get a percentage, whereas record stations and radio stations help receive them money the most. And so then you have resisting the top 40, progressive rock, which alternative music, which was not suitable for radio, probably explicit, probably talked about heavy things, and that was made because some artists were like, we're making music for us. We're not making music to be on the top Billboard 100 or whatever. We're making it for us, so they made music that wasn't suitable for radio. And then you had format specialization, which is radio became secondary to TV. So people would watch TV, but also turn into the radio more. It was kind of, you had talk shows on the radio. So you have news/talk shows, 1990s. I think of Sleepless in Seattle, in the scene where Meg Ryan's character goes to Seattle and she listens to the radio. I picture that. Or Frasier. Of course, Frasier. I love Frasier. That's a good example of that. And then you had it was more expensive than music format, because music format, they could just upload the music and it would play. Whereas radio talk shows, you would have to pull out cuss words, make it short, have manpower, write scripts, all of that. So it became more expensive, but to me it's worth it. And then you have music formats. You have adult contemporary music stations where a mix of news, talk, classics, and soft rocks were all in one. You have contemporary hit radios, and then you also have country radios. I know in the South we have 10,000 country radios, but country and pop are becoming more and more popular. Especially, significantly, country is becoming more and more popular. So there are many stations like CMT and others where they will play country nonstop. And then you have nonprofit radios, which are your news stations like Fox, CNN, but also like Pacifica Foundation, which challenged status quo in both radio and government. So they were nonprofit, and they paid their time to basically challenge the status quo. And then you have non-commercial networks. So National Public Radio and Public Broadcasting Services like Georgia Public Broadcasting Service or PBS Kids was non-commercial and it was free for everyone. And then you have radio beyond broadcasting. So you have internet radio, which emerged in the 1990s with popularity, like streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, and Pandora, where all of these you can just listen to radio stations, listen to music, listen to podcasts. And then you have iHeartRadio, which was Big Machine Records. So Big Machine Records, which is this big record label, started their own radio station called iHeart, like Disney with Radio Disney, where they got to choose what music they wanted. They helped people make their mark, help people start their careers by going on these radios and playing their songs constantly. And you have podcasting, which is really big. So you have podcasts, one of the top podcast channels, Crime Junkies, which is true crime. I like listening to them. I also like Anything Goes by Emma Chamberlain, who is a YouTube influencer who does podcasts. And then one of my favorites, Two Girls, One Ghost, which is supernatural. And I also have National Park After Dark, which is supernatural. It talks about Appalachian folklore, missing people while hitting hiking trails, which I love a lot. And so there's different varieties than just the Burt Show, where it's just a talk show in the morning. You can do spirituality, relationship advice, psychology like Frasier, or just relaxing or true crime. And then you have local and national. So radio earned $14.1 billion in gross advertising revenue. So in that space and ad time, where we hear ads all the time, that radio or radio stations would receive money from that. So typically 20% of typical radio budgets goes to covering programming costs. So to getting on the air, taking up that space, producing it, all of that, 20% of what they make right here or more, goes to that. And then you have payola, which is the practice of that records promoters pay DJs to play a particular song, maybe to get people on the track. So record deals will literally buy some artist's way to the top. And you have the Billboard Top 100s, which is the most top songs, most streamed songs, most popular songs on the radio during a given time. And this was 2020's top 100s overall, so Say So, Savage, Blinding Lights. And then you have the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which changed rules concerning access to public airways because the FCC eliminated most ownership restrictions on radio. So anyone can access the radio. Anyone can be on the radio. So it changed the rules concerning the access to public airways, where you have to have permission, where you have to go to the radio stations to be accessed on the radio instead of doing it yourself. And that is basically it. And with this unit, I was very interested. I had knew nothing going in, and I learned mainly the business and how radio is a monopoly, where the best one will win, and how it changed from Morse code to just being military to dramatic ratings to streaming, all of that, and it was very interesting. So thank you so much for tuning in.